Well, good morning, everyone, and it is indeed morning at 3:33 a.m. on Tuesday, November 13th, and the purpose of this video is to actually demonstrate several different things: my startup procedure, focusing, and then target selection and acquisition. So all I've started up now as far as software is the video capture, screen capture software. So we're going to begin by bringing up the Planetarium and Telescope capture software, which in this case is the TSX Pro by Software Bisque. And the first thing we do there is to connect the telescope. And here we see the telescope control under ASCOM. Okay, I'll unpark it while I'm here. It could just as well be unparked from TSX Pro. And then what I typically do is I aim the sky chart, and that's what this is. This is the sky chart. I aim that toward the south, toward the yellow dot you saw up there was the indicator of the position of the telescope. So I think I'll focus on use Castor as a focusing star. And you may hear the telescope slewing. Let's get this image up right. And while that's happening, I'll go ahead and bring up the camera control software, which is Backyard Nikon, the Nikon version of Backyard EOS. Okay, I paused it while it took a little while to start up, maybe 5 seconds. Okay, here we connect to the camera of choice. And that, of course, that preference could be saved, so I wouldn't have to do that again. But okay, the camera is now connected, and I can do an initial live view, which is under what they call frame and focus. And not surprisingly, Castor is not really there yet. So what we do is we go back to TSX Pro, engage the camera. The camera add-on in TSX Pro is marvelous, but it does not have direct control of the Nikon. It has to connect through Backyard Nikon. Okay. Okay, so what I'll do initially is take a few second exposure at a higher ISO to establish the position of the telescope in the sky. Currently, TSX Pro thinks that it's pointing at Castor, and it's bound to be off after slewing that far. So we will take an initial picture that will tell us where the telescope is actually pointing, and then we'll go through the image link process, which is the TSX Pro version of a plate solve. It's more than that, but it basically does the plate solve. Okay, and as you can see, there's the star in the lower right corner. Excuse me, lower left corner, just slightly out of the field of view. So that's not too terribly bad. So what we do at this point is send the software or send the image to an image link, and since it's been 2x2, I use an image scale of 2 arc seconds. It doesn't have to be right on there. Okay, and seeing is not the best at 4.94 arc seconds, but that's not the point of this exercise just yet. So what happens is when I minimize the image link screen, it shows me the photograph that I just took overlaid on top of the actual sky map. Okay, in other words, there's Castor, of course, and here's where the telescope is really pointing. So what I need to do is simply synchronize the telescope or the software with where the telescope is actually pointing there. Okay, and then having done that, I'll need to reacquire Castor, which we will use for focusing. Okay. There. And again, the yellow circle indicates where the telescope is actually pointing. Castor is the target that I've selected, and then I have it centered in the middle of the screen. Now watch what happens when I command the telescope to slew to the target. Okay. You see it went to it, then it dropped down, it went back up again so it could engage the gears. Okay, now what we do at that point is take another picture just to make sure everything is whole. Okay, that it really is pointing there at Castor. And then once we've satisfied ourselves of that, we can go ahead and do a focusing run. Now I actually could simply pull up, and there it is, pretty well centered, pretty well. Okay, so at this point I can close the image link process, and I'll flip back over to the camera control software. And perform a focusing run. There you see, there it is, pretty well centered. It doesn't need to be centered, but you know what I'll do is using the joystick controller attached to the PC, I can move the star around, get it right in the center, pretty much. Reason for that is I'm going to magnify the screen 5 times, and we don't want the target star on the edge of the screen. So what we're going to do now is install I'm physically moving to the telescope and installing the Bahtinov focusing mask. Okay, which you can see what it looks like there. Okay, and you know, it's pretty well focused, but you know what, that difference, and what we should see is this central bar centered between the bars of the X. So all we need to do is, I'm back at the telescope, so I'm going to, there, that was farther off focus, just to show you, and get that positioned nicely there. Okay, that looks very good. And ordinarily, the seeing isn't the best, because ordinarily those spikes would be a good bit better defined, sharper looking. Okay, so removing the Bahtinov mask, shutting down the 5x magnifier, and as an indication of focus, in addition to the Bahtinov mask, what one can do is use the full width at half maximum or the half flux diameter. That on a night of good seeing, these numbers would be, say, 2.5, 3. So the 5.0, 5.2 is indicating it's really not all that great, but that's okay. It probably won't even show up in the images that we're going to take. So I go back and switch back to, whoops, sorry about that, there, okay, to the SkyX Pro. Okay, now that I've gone through the initialization process, and that's the same process I would go through any night, okay, slew to some area of the sky, locate a conveniently placed fairly bright star, and let's see, Castor is a magnitude of 1.58. That's pretty bright. I mean, you can use a 2 or 3 or even a 4 magnitude star to focus on, and in the focusing run, you can increase the brightness, the gain, exposure time. If the star is overly overexposed, then those spikes will broaden out and you'll hide any out of focus. So anyhow, I've completed the initialization process, and now it's a matter of target selection. Now here it comes down to a great question that was posed by one of our members. What is the thought process here? Well, to my way of thinking, there are two ways that one goes about locating targets. One is you have a particular target in mind, which I do this evening. But there are nights when you come out, you get everything set up, and you resolve whatever technical issues you run into, or you don't have any technical issues. Okay? That does happen. And years ago, what had happened was I'd get to that point, and then I'd say, well, where do I go from here? I'm confused. I'm bewildered. I mean, it's a big sky. Where do I start? I mean, if you zoom in close enough to do any good, to see things of interest, you kind of lose the big view. So for that reason, I started to collect a list of objects that I deemed were targets, and here that is. And they are now loaded into TSX Pro, okay? And then what's possible is to check this box in the upper left corner, and it will blink and show these targets. Okay. And this is how I came across the Eskimo the other morning, by simply doing this and then locating it, which I can't seem to do now, even though it was roughly the same time of day. So what I'm going to do is go back and find the Eskimo Nebula, or NGC 2392. Click find, and it tells me it's right below there. Okay, that's great. That's why it stood out a few days ago. It didn't now because I specifically had the target in mind, so I just want to get to it. Okay, so what one does at this point is slew to the target, okay, and then do a quick image, and if necessary, plate solve. But the quick image will tell us where the target is. And I'm going to do 30 seconds, and while that's running, I'll pause the video. And for now, I'm going to leave the ISO at 1600. I normally like to shoot at 800, but let's go with this. And I'll pause the video so you won't have to sit through this exposure. But what this will show is hopefully the Eskimo Nebula fairly well centered, and then anything else that's in the field of view. Okay, and the exposure is wrapping up. Takes a little bit of time to download from the camera, and Backyard Nikon is the one that's actually doing the exposure. TSX Pro captures, well, let me back up there. Backyard Nikon will create the actual raw file, since that's what we've indicated we wanted in Backyard Nikon. But what TSX Pro does is what it adds, what it does is it creates a FITS file, and I've chosen 2x2 binning. Okay, so anyhow, what we're going to do is image link this puppy. Okay, again, it's still 2 arc seconds per pixel image scale. There, okay. So let's minimize that. Now here's what's different. This morning, of course, you're seeing NGC 2392, but the other morning, what I saw was a glow off to the right. So I'm going to load that. So I'll open that FITS file. Whoops, I have to go get it. So I'm going to pause at this point. Okay, I had to go and retrieve a copy from the from a folder from the other night, and now what I can do is open a FITS file, and here it is from November 8th. The exposure that was chosen to preview the view of the Eskimo Nebula. So we open that, and you see the difference here is now you do see, and it's projected onto the sky chart, you do see this glow, which is, of course, is not there this morning. And what's neat about this whole process then, here, let me drop this. We don't need this any longer. There. What's really neat about this process, I know apparently the two images were at slightly different orientations, so you're getting a little bit of a pattern here. But one of the things that's really neat now with the ability to point and shoot, I decided on the spot at that time to center the image within this frame. And by the way, this frame is a projection of what the camera looks like, what the image looks like with the present camera that I have. Although my camera is a Nikon 7500, all they had in the list of available cameras was the 7200. But back to the point at hand, let's say I want to position the target NGC 2392 here and have the, well, it turned out to be a comet down here. So all I have to do that is click on the spot, indicating, identifying a point on the chart, and then it turns out that I happen to land on a guide scar, but it could have been simply a mouse click position. So center that, okay, and now slew, again the yellow dot indicating where the telescope is actually pointing. So I want to slew to the center of interest that I wanted to take a picture of. Okay, so I'm going to bring back up the image link software so I can close these images, break the connection between the image and the sky chart, and close that for now. So here's where we are pointed, and this is according to the sky chart. It knows about 2392, but it did not at the time. Well, I didn't know about the comet. Although going back then, and I'll show this later, there was a small yellow indicator which turned out to be the comet. So it was on the chart, but it was too small for me to see on my initial effort. Okay, so what we're going to do now, I'll just do a, no, I'll do a 30-second. Okay, And again, I'll stay with 1600. I keep telling myself that so that I remember to set it back to 800 just before taking the image. And of course, again, I'm pausing unless you like to watch that scroll bar go by. Okay, and there is the image. Apparently I picked up a couple of dust specks. Thank you. And let's see what we have here. Oh, I don't want to do that. So here's 2392, okay, which is this, and a bright star above it, and nothing much of interest in the middle of the screen, okay. And then again, there would be a comet. Geez, I hope that's not another comet down there. So let's take a look at what that image actually looks like using my venerable Nikon View NXI. Okay. There, okay. This is the image that I just took after positioning the frame in between where the comet had been and where this is, okay. And in fact, just to show you what that looked like at the time, I can simply go into my library. Yeah, I go a little deep. There, okay. Now this was the original first image whereby I saw the comet, and then after centering on the middle, here's where it is. And then after taking several pictures, I'm sorry, here it is. There's the comet. That's when I kicked off. Back here is when I kicked off a series of 3-minute exposures with something like a minute or two, I can't recall, a minute or two delay in between. I can tell by going back and looking at the start and stop times of the sequence of images. And there would be a gap from the end of one image to the beginning of the next. Okay. And then from here in the post-processing is where I took these images, of course, during the daylight or inside the house. I'm at the telescope now. Took these images, ran them through my post-processing software of choice, which is Images Plus. And instead of stacking and combining them, it simply converted the images from RAW to TIFF, and then I stretched the images and had them all aligned. And from there, I was able to use the GIF software to produce the movie file that you had seen. So I'll go back and kick off just a quick series of exposures just to show you what that looked like. So this is something I would do, or one would do in the normal course of activity. Set your exposure time. Now for this purpose I'm going to create a series, okay? Now the series has its own ISO indicator, so that's a big help. And there are a number of other things that we need to do. Go into the autosave window and set the target, things of that nature. Okay. Okay, I think that ought to wrap it up as far as the immediate questions that came up. How do you do target selection, acquisition, capture, and then of course again processing comes later. Okay, so if there are any questions, leave them below or email me, and I'm going to close down the this video capture at this point. Thank you.